We've done 40 bloody episodes.
40
Can you
episodes
believe
and
it?
we still can't remember the intro music.
Oh man, yeah, sorry, that was my fault. We'll get the outro music. People will forgive us. Olive is going to be joining us shortly. But this week, Jay Sean, we decided we'd look at, I suppose, some of the statistics around neurodiversity, what that looks like in the real world, people's experiences, and explore that because I suppose because we are working in the industry, we very much are aware of the statistics around the impact neurodiversity has on different options for people. So, but not everybody does. Not everybody does. Hold on a second. Hold up, hold up. What's that you're wearing?
What is that? Future
Future
Proof
Proof
Knowledge?
Knowledge
Fuck.
podcast show. That is a fantastic hoodie. We need to get those out for people to buy them. People should be able to buy those. It shouldn't be just for you. If
99.99. Give you the one off my back.
you'll sign it in everyone with
Everything.
silver pen. Um, yeah, but I suppose like if we kind of delve into things straight away, like what is neurodiversity? What are some of the main neurodiverse traits that people have or diagnoses that people can get? So some of the ones that people will absolutely know about, some of the most known ones are things like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia. And we'll kind of talk about each of these in a little bit more detail as we go. But I think, and I can't wait for Olive to join us to talk about her current, I won't say fascination, her current interest in ADHD. So we'll hold off on that one. But I suppose I'll come to you as the expert on autism. I was really, really surprised to find out that, well, I wasn't really, but it was interesting to find out statistically, according to the World Health Organization, 1 in 100 students, or sorry, children have autism. And like, if we break that down, say an average class size of, say, 30 students in a primary school, like most primary schools in Ireland are probably going to have 3 to 4 classes. So you're going to have at least one child with autism in each year. But, and we'll start this off from the get go, that usually people will have and can have a number of different neurodiversities. So rarely they'll just be um, just the one. But talk to me about autism and 1 in 100 young people having autism. Like
Well, I would
that's
say
quite a
the
high
one in
number when you
100.
break up the
Yeah,
yeah. Go on.
that's quite a big number. And if you even go a little bit further, if you look into the difficulty and the time it takes to get a diagnosis, and just the general knowledge of it, that number would be much higher because there's a lot of diagnoses that go under the table that aren't caught until the later years. The amount of adult diagnosis is increasing as the years go by too, because these things are being missed um, in the younger years. Part of it is historically, especially with boys, um, they get, instead of being diagnosed with a neurodiversity, it's, oh, they're just being a boy, they're rowdy, they're bad, they do this, they do that. It's just boys being boys. And a lot of that overlooks what the underlying challenge may be. So the lack of diagnosis and getting a diagnosis probably doesn't do that number any justice. But yeah, I mean, it's when we first got our diagnosis, to me, it was like, wow, this is a 1 in a million chance. But then once we started to educate ourselves and learn more, and you start talking to people, you find out that pretty much everybody you know is either directly they know somebody in their immediate family, or they're within 1 degree of separation from somebody who is neurodiverse. So it's not something that's not known about. It's prevalent. People know about it. People have family members, if not directly in their household, um, other family members that are related in other places. So, I mean, it's there. Um, and when you get the diagnosis, it's quite challenging and scary because nobody studies this stuff before you get the diagnosis. So when you first get the diagnosis, you know nothing about it, which brings in the fear. Um, but yeah, 1 in 100. I I would expect it to be even higher than that.
Yeah, I would have thought the same. And before we carry on, I'm going to welcome the amazing, the truly wonderful, one of my favorite people in the world, Miss Olive Hickmat. Olive, how are you doing this week?
I'm fine. I'm sorry. I came in and got stuck in the wrong place. I was in the podcast. So sorry I'm late.
No problem at all. So we've just been saying to the audience that we're going to break down different statistics for the different types of neurodiversity. So we really want to get your input because I was highlighting how your big interest at the moment is in ADHD, and you're on this fantastic journey to understand again, I love how your brain thinks because you pull in different elements. But we're kicking off with autism and how 1 in 100 children will have autism. And I think you're right, Jay Sean. Any of the statistics that we've come across, they will be the official statistics, but in reality, there's going to be a lot more. And I was going to meet a friend of mine today, my oldest friend in the world, and I haven't seen him in a couple of months. We're having a coffee, and I met the mum of a former client of mine who had come to me because he was struggling with anxiety, and we had finished our work together, and things had improved. But his mum was saying that he got knocked off track again, and it got really bad for him. And then eventually they took him to be assessed, and to their amazement, they discovered that he had autism, and the parents had no idea. And once they got the diagnosis, then they were able to go and access the correct supports for this young person. And he ended up going in for inpatient treatment for, I think it was maybe 12 weeks. But she said that the change for the better in him when he came out has just been like it has saved their family. And I think that, like, for all the statistics and all the research and everything like that, it's the human impact, the day-to-day impact on a family that I think sometimes gets lost when people are having conversations about neurodiversity. Like you've discussed many, many times, Jay Sean, the challenges that you guys have experienced, like even last week's podcast where you were doing it on your own, like even those discussions around this is what the reality of the day-to-day is like, just going to the shop, just trying to get ready to go to school, just trying to get to go to bed. And this mum was, while she was talking to me about it, she was almost in tears at remembering what it was like. She thought she genuinely had lost her son. She thought he's not going to survive. And that was a genuine fear that she had. And getting that support, the diagnosis, and then the support on top of that, it just filled my heart that they actually got to a place where he's back in school. He's just been a regular teenager now. You know,
It's excellent.
instead of feeling like there was something wrong with him. So, like, just so powerful. But Olive, it's your time to shine now. No pressure. So, again, statistically, there is research that shows, I think again, is the World Health Organization will say that 5 to 7% of children in the world are estimated to have ADHD. They reckon 2.5 to 4% of adults are believed to have ADHD, but many are undiagnosed. Historically, boys would be diagnosed a lot more often, but girls are frequently missed or misdiagnosed, or diagnosed later due to the different presentation styles. And Jason, you touched on this as well. So the reality is ADHD isn't rare. It's just under-recognized. Like, that's quite startling. That's, if we look at it, nearly 10% of the population will have ADHD. And yet in my experience, we will look to medicate those young people so that they can feel like themselves. And I've seen all ends of the spectrum in terms of medication. I've seen medication actually allow children and families the headspace to be able to build what we call a normal routine, family routine, right over to children themselves as young as 9, 10, refusing to take the medication because they don't feel like themselves. They feel like they are an imposter, that they're being controlled by an imposter. So they just will refuse to take it. And that then brings its own challenges within the family system, because you have parents struggling to manage the symptoms of ADHD as well as regular childhood challenges that will present themselves. So talk to us a bit about your research that you've been doing and some of the findings you've come across in relation to ADHD.
Well, the first thing I want to say is that most people who think they have ADHD or have a diagnosis of ADHD look upon it as being something awful. And I come from a strength-based approach where I go, okay, so what is it you're good at? And that has all sorts of benefits to finding what people enjoy doing, what they're good at doing, what's going on for them, what's stopping them doing what they're wanting to do, etc., etc. And so that's quite different to most people. And unfortunately, the world thinks it's a disaster. And I spend my time talking about the great strengths of ADHD. And I also am looking at the overlap between dyslexia and ADHD. That is horrendous. That is something like, I've forgotten how the numbers work, but it's something like 60% overlap in one direction or the other. I think one way it's 40% and one way it's 60%, and I can't remember which way around they are. But it's absolutely enormous. And so why aren't we looking at how people are doing both of them? And as far as I know, I'm the only lunatic who is looking at why people are doing both of them. And one of the reasons they're doing both of them is there's, having been working in this field for 25 years now, all these neurodiverse people, whether they're adults or children, almost all of them are highly visual thinkers. They're thinking in pictures. That's not the way schools are coping with them, because schools are taught to think in, that they teach in auditory, which is speaking or reading or listening or whatever it is. And these are highly visual children. And that includes, by the way, the autistic crew. And it also includes loads of the other challenges that you mentioned earlier. And when I started collecting people's strengths and all I did was to ask people when they came to see me one-on-one, what they were good at. And I started collecting this list, and the list kept on reoccurring all the time, that people were creative, curious, imaginative, problem solvers, all sorts of things that they weren't recognizing were strengths of theirs. They were just the way they were. And I still run workshops. I mean, I had a workshop this week for the local recovery college, and 2 ADHD people on it that also had ADHD children, and exactly the same strengths yet again, that they just think in pictures. Now, thinking in pictures has some real interesting knock-on effects, because the first problem is that schools don't recognize it. So that if you're thinking in pictures, things will not work out the way the school thinks they're going to. If they keep bombarding children with auditory information, they're having to convert it in their brains to pictures, which may take a second. So if you ask somebody who's highly visual, you tell them a whole load of stuff, and then you ask them a question. They've got to convert what they've just heard into pictures, and they may take a few seconds longer to answer the question. But it's not an awful lot longer. But then you get people saying, "Oh, they've got slow memory, short-term memory. That's what slow short-term memory." And I go, well, it depends what they're doing. I will give you an example if you feel like it. I had a little girl once who her report had got slow short-term memory. And it said, when we ask her what you do, why would you go to an airport, she's a long time in answering. So what do you do? And so I said to her the same question. And a few minutes, about 30 seconds later, she answered it. And I said, "Excuse me, can you just tell me why there was a gap between me asking the question and you answering it?" And she said, "Oh, I live in Luton, and we were going up to the airport, and we went underneath the bridge, and then we went round the roundabout, and I know Luton Airport because it's near here. Went round the roundabout, and then we went into the parking lots, and then we all went round to the back of the car, and we got our suitcases out, and I got one of those lovely pull-along suitcases that you could sit on, and then we walked up to the terminal building, and then we had a very long queue to join, and then I put my suitcase on the conveyor belt thing, and it went away, and then we went upstairs and had a cup of tea, and 10 minutes later, she said, and then we went on holiday." And so this child is not slow. She's extremely busy doing stuff, but nobody thinks to ask her what she was doing. And that quite often happens. Sometimes not quite as obvious as that. It might just be a second or two delay, but they are sorting out their pictures to answer the question properly.
That's a really powerful, simple thing, though, that anybody can implement, be it a parent, be it a therapist, be it an educator, anybody can.
Yeah, and the minute you get a report that says slow short-term memory, you go find out I go find out what they're doing.
So what are some of the strengths that you see outside of the thinking in pictures, and what are the other strengths you see in ADHD?
Well, the thing is that they're very common between dyslexia and ADHD, and quite often with autism, if you can communicate with the autistic child. But it's so they are thinking in pictures, but what it comes out as being, and I'll just have a look at my short list here, because we did actually categorize 40 of these. And so you've got pattern recognition, for example. Sort of doing puzzles can be really good. Having light bulb moments, because you're not having to go through a lot of sequential routes to have a good idea. It just flashes into your brain. Intuition, you know what's going on in a room, or you know what's going on with somebody. Now with ADHD, that's definitely got two sides. It's really helpful to know what's going on in a room when you enter it. But if somebody's saying one thing and thinking something else, you may well be picking up on that as being really unpleasant. And so with a lot of these, there's a sort of positive and a negative. Empathy, really empathetic to other people. The only problem with that is that if mum's upset, you may well be upset as well. Or if the teacher's upset, you may be upset. So you're picking up on that. Having a really inventive mindset and a real curiosity. The why question comes up a lot. They want to know why is this? And I know several ADHD people who continuously, when you're talking to them, they go, hang on a minute, why is that happening? I want to know about that before they can move on. It's the curiosity thing coming out. And the interesting thing is we categorized 40 of these, and they've all got visual thinking behind them. If you think about problem solving, you're trying to put your bicycle back together again and you know what it looks like. So you've got visual behind that. What do they call them? The World Economic Forum a few years ago identified a whole list of things that they call the 10 skills needed by businesses worldwide in 2025. My list and their list have an 80% overlap. So we're not making this, these are important people. They've got important skills. And the last thing we want them to do is go, I've got ADHD. We want them to go, what are we going to use it for? What are they really interested in?
And I think the problem, like even just with the two we've discussed already, autism and ADHD, the system is not set up to support that. So it's not blaming any individual teachers, principals, therapists. I'm not blaming anybody, but the system isn't set up. The society we have is not set up to support and encourage those children from a young age. Now, when they become adults, those skills can be utilized and turned into something positive, but it's not, and that's why I think you're saying it's seen as a negative very young. And even if we delve into dyslexia, they say 15 to 20% of the world's population are dyslexic, but that's officially. They reckon it's closer to 40%. Nearly half of the world's population would classify as being dyslexic. That's, for me, that's not a developmental issue. That's a diagnostic issue. Maybe they're not different if nearly 50% of the population would actually hit it. And, I suppose it is one of the most common ones, but
there's some really, really bright people who are dyslexic.
Absolutely.
But they don't have to be dyslexic. You have these very bright people who that are thinking in pictures. They are very bright in their chosen field. And there are many books on this. I mean, one book talks about people being acquiring what do they call them, awards? I've forgotten. Nobel awards for something like biochemistry or something, or chemistry. And these people were struggling with literacy all the way through school, may have been diagnosed dyslexic, but they've got the brain that can knit together possibilities and go, I think we could, Edison and the light bulbs, it's all the same thing, that we can work out how to do this without going through all the formal routes along the way. And so they make quantum leaps into what's possible, and then they have to try and prove it, which is, to a large extent, is what I've been doing with dyslexia, because I've gone, there's a different way we could be teaching these kids, and if we use it and explore it and do the research for it, then we can. I've got an echo now, Alan. Oh, right, okay. And if we explore it, and there is a different way of these children learning. And one of the things that people say to me often is, you talk about visual thinking all the time, but these kids are not visualizing words. And I go, this is different. They are visualizing pictures, and they can visualize words, but they've never thought of it. And the most common expression is, you know, as well, when somebody says, when somebody gets it and realizes how to visualize words as well as their pictures, they suddenly go, oh, I can do that. I didn't know I was meant to be doing that. And it's a bit like watching the TV with the subtitles on. You know, you can watch the TV without the subtitles and listen, or you could actually watch it with the subtitles on. And then you would start visualizing words more easily.
Yeah, and I think like we regularly discuss on here the challenges that these young people experience, but I suppose, and Jason, I'll come to you on this, like we don't want to be diagnosing people all the time, but again, unfortunately, the structures and the system that we have, you'll only get supports if you have the diagnosis. And that allows a huge percentage of the population to slip through the nets. Like, could you guys imagine trying to navigate the system that you've had to navigate if you didn't have official reports and diagnoses?
We wouldn't have any of the supports we have now without the diagnosis of an official diagnosis. I think what the problem is, though, neurodiversities have been such a afterthought in the medical industry for so long. You know, you have a child. One of the first things you do that first year, your child's going to the doctor for checkups, and they're looking to make sure they're healthy. They're always checking your child's health. Year 2, year 3, more appointments checking the health. You get into school, you have that physical that you need to take for school. So they're always checking the health as a mandatory statute in order to go to school and in order to do things and in order just to show you're being a good parent. You have to like have these checkups. What they're not making mandatory is assessments. Just because a child seems normal, seems neurotypical, we all do at a certain stage. Why are we not giving some of these basic standard assessments the clinical side instead of the medical side? If we're so focused on always, I mean, our whole lives where you need to get a checkup, you need to go to the dentist to make sure your teeth are good, you need to go do this to make sure this part of your body's good, but there's not a big push or there's no structure from the government that says you should regularly, all kids should get this type of assessment at this age so we can find out what their needs are at a young age, get them set up for success so when they enter school, we have this stuff figured out and it's not a guessing game after they hit school. So I think that's one of the major flaws in our system is we're reactive and not proactive when it comes to neurotypical and neurodiverse brains. It's always
I think, yeah, and I think, look, that's always going to come down to money. You know, there's the cost of getting an assessment is so high that the people who give the assessments don't want to lose that because it's very lucrative. And because that's very lucrative, schools, government officials can't afford to get those assessments. But what if they were just given as, like you said, just a normal part of the assessment process, whether that's having a medical assessment, that you also have a developmental assessment, as in learning developmental assessment. Like it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, because I mean, from my experience, a lot of the assessments are observational. So they're, in my mind, if my son is at the doctor for an hour getting a checkup, they should have some type of staff on hand that just does the observational. And whether it's something they do they have a staff that's in there the first couple of years of a child's life that just comes in observational during medical checkups. Observation could show you a lot of signs. As parents, we don't know what to look for unless we've been experienced with other families that have neurodiverse in their wheelhouse. So again, me and my wife coming into this, getting the diagnosis, we knew nothing about what to observe, but it was the observations that led us to the thinking that he may have autism, and that was through the Autism Speaks commercials. Does your child not make eye contact? Does your child like to be left alone? And they ask all these questions, and you start looking at your kid, you're like, God damn, my kid won't look me in the eye. Or if we're talking and I'm like, put something to the side, there's no reaction, like typical things. And it's weird because like when you go to the doctor, one of the oldest things, they grab that little thing and they hit your knee to check your reflexes. I mean, they do that in autism tests to see how you react and if your brain triggers that emotion. So I don't know. I think spending the money up front to do the diagnosis saves money in the long run from having to spend all the extra care bringing a child back to a grounded space. If you let the diagnosis go, you don't find out till the child's 7. Now you've got all these behaviors that you've got to correct that you could have addressed from the very beginning. It's a very interesting space because it's not only that there's not enough diagnosis and they cost too much and the wait period is long, but then also it's has a lot to do with the data silos, which is what makes it hard to figure out and diagnose what people's needs are. When you go to a doctor and that doctor has your medical records, but that's not shared with, let's say, your ABA therapy center, and your ABA therapy center and your BCBAs and your speech pathologists and your occupational therapists aren't sharing their information with your educators that are spending the time with your child in school, and your educators aren't sharing the experience in class with your occupational therapist, speech therapist, and your medical doctor, then no one has a full picture of the person at the center of it. And everyone's making a hypothesis based off from limited information. So those data silos are also causing a bigger burden to the family, to the client at the center of the care, and also a financial burden to the overall general public because we're not addressing these needs, which means we need to spend state money, government money, families' personal finances, and dump into all these institutions to play catch up and reactive because we have these separate data silos. So I think if we can break down the fragmentation of data, unify that, and also bring assessments to the forefront, I think we could identify more individuals, get them the care they need earlier, which will in turn support their education from an earlier stage, which would in turn give them better benefits and higher expectations of succeeding post-school and getting into the working community. And we can start creating roles within corporations that will support these neurodiverse minds in the workforce. And if we get the system right, we save money across the board and we make everyone's lives easier. The educators, the clinicians, the families, and the person who matters most, the person at the center of this bubble, the client, your child, your student. So it's quite a mess we're in, and it's going to take a lot of great minds and great thinking and great software to kind of break down the barriers and bring us into the age of technology that we're in. I mean, we need to get up to date, and we're just working from an old system that's not supporting us the way we need it.
Yeah, and I do think the expectation then is on the parent to be the one who gathers all that information together. And they're the ones who are completely overwhelmed because they don't know what to do, because they're trying to support their kids, but they're also dealing with the meltdowns at home, the tears, the tantrums, the dysregulation, and probably trying to hold down a job and keep a roof over everybody's head. Like, it's a huge weight on top of people's shoulders. And you bring up a really important point, because like statistically, neurodiverse students are more likely to be the ones who get in trouble in school, have behavioral issues in school, be expelled from school. And in Britain, this one's for you, Olive, 92% of students who show significant school distress, including school avoidance, are neurodiverse. 92%. Like, what are we doing to these kids? What are we doing to them?
Take you back to, these are visual thinking children, and we're trying to educate them as if they are, their best skill is auditory. Now just think back, when a child is born, what are they relying on? They're relying on pictures. The first thing they have to do is recognize mum in order to get fed. And so their world is pictures. By the time they are 6 weeks old, they will normally be smiling at mum or dad because they're recognizing them. If mum wears a pink curly wig, then they'll probably cry because that's not mum anymore. So they're already doing pictures at 6 weeks old. And we wait until they go into school, and then we go, okay, we're going to give them auditory training. And I've seen auditory training that works for some children, but it doesn't work for all children. And so what we're doing is, if it doesn't work for the child, we're generating stress. And then we are generating all sorts of things, which might be school refusing, meltdowns, coming home, having a meltdown, whatever, not wanting to go to school because they are struggling with the way that they're being taught. And that's no reflection on the teachers. We are not teaching the teachers anything about how visual thinking children think and learn. And so, there is a wonderful statistic produced by George Land many years ago about how many creative geniuses there were at 4 years old. And anybody who's had a 4-year-old will know they're a creative genius. They can put a new toy together and they'll work their way through it and organize it. And so he reckoned that 98% of 4-year-olds were creative geniuses. By the time they've become adults, it's down to something of the order of 2%. So we are losing our creativity. And that's what we have got to retain, because it's important for the world, all this creativity and curiosity and problem solving. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. And even, the World Economic Forum is even onto that. And the other thing is that Jason was mentioning observation earlier. There's a lot you can observe about why a child is struggling in school. You don't need an assessment to notice that they are starting to get stressed, for example. It's not working for them, however they're being taught. I meet children who decide to write with a pen and their nose is almost on the end of the pen on the table. They are down in their emotions. If they're looking up, they will be far happier. And so everybody knows that stressed children can't learn, but we carry on teaching them. And so we get them more and more stressed. And that's where I think the overlap comes with ADHD, because they get so stressed, they start looking as if they've got ADHD and actually generate it. And that's very controversial. But we are at the moment in the UK in the process of trying to move more children out of special needs school and into mainstream school, well, that would be fine if we were teaching the kid, everybody, as if they were neurodiverse or they have got great visual memory. But we're not doing any of that. We're not teaching the teachers how to do that. So that's going to be another big problem.
Yeah, here in Ireland, our government put out a wonderful new proposal that they would start piloting integrating special education classes in with the regular typical classes. And they decided to not bring any of the neurodiverse support organizations in to have the conversation about it, with no extra resources, no extra supports, or not insufficient extra resources and supports, because you can't just lump, and from September, they announced it last week, you can't just lump, and I mean that, like literally just throw two classes together and expect a teacher to be able to teach. Like, they don't have the training, they don't have the supports, there absolutely will not be enough special education assistants teachers there either. Like, it just won't happen. So all of the autism supports, dyslexic support communities have come out and said, whoa, you need to slow right down. We understand on a theoretical level, you want there to be integration. You want, like, as a society, we should be integrating people with different neurodiversities into our regular communities. But you can't just do it without discussing it with the people who know all of this information best and are living it. I think that's the other thing, because a lot of the time, decision makers are working off research that's been read, that has been done by a person who is not actively working in the field, and they're making those large-scale governmental decisions based on the research without actually understanding fully what the lived experience is for the individual, for their parents, for the teachers, for the special education students, for the therapists, for the psychologists. And they just make these random decisions, and then will put a huge amount of money just so they can show, look, we've put 5 million quid into neurodiverse supports. How can anybody give out to us and complain and say that that our government isn't supporting the neurodiverse communities? Absolutely mind-boggling for me.
Can I just add an interesting statistic I have, is that every single child I have yet met, and I don't pretend I've met them all, of course, but every single child I have yet met who is diagnosed dyslexic, or an adult for that matter, is not visualizing words. And that's called orthographic mapping. It's known in neuroscience that you need to develop orthographic mapping to be able to read fluently and to be able to spell. And we are not checking this for any child. And it can be, I check it with children when I first meet them, and it takes less than 15 minutes to work out whether they have developed this skill. And not one of them has ever developed this skill. If anybody can produce me a child or an adult that is diagnosed dyslexic and has the capability of visualizing words, I'd be very interested to talk to them, because I've never yet met one. And so this is a skill that can be developed. We know how to teach it now. Alan teaches it all the time. I teach it all the time. And so do our practitioners. And it works. And we know the neuroscience of why it works. And so it's a question of some things are in plain sight, that you can see what's going on. You don't need an assessment. I'm actually very anti-assessments for dyslexia when children are really young, because to me, they they've missed the point. You know, the I don't really want. I mean, assessments are meant to be for 7-year-olds in the UK, and there's pressure for it to become younger. I don't think it should become younger. I think we should teach them in a way that works for the children and building on their strengths. One of the things about a diagnosis is it points out anything that's wrong with you. It doesn't point out anything that's right with you. And I think that's a fundamental problem. I mean, it's all right if you've gone to the doctors and you've got acne or something, you're going to point out where the rashes are and what's wrong, right? You're not going to explain what is good about it, But when you come to dyslexia and ADHD, there's a whole bucket load of stuff that's good about it. And there is a few things that are not very good about it. But you don't want to focus only on what's wrong. Well, that's where I think we're going wrong.
Absolutely. And Jason, as we kind of move towards closing today's conversation, like we're talking a lot about young people, we're talking a lot about students, but those young people grow up. And statistically, neurodiverse children who grow into adults have less positive career outcomes as a general rule. Now, everyone will be able to point to the people who buck that trend, but in general, they can really struggle in the working environment because a lot of the times the work environment is very structured, very much like school, but just slightly different because you can leave a job if it's not working for you. But when you look at the world around you, like, are there opportunities for those neurodiverse people that and have been in your life that they could find a career that could give them fulfillment and better life outcomes? And what might be some of those careers? And Olive, I'll come to you on this after as well.
I mean, that's kind of a loaded question because, again, neurodiversity. Yeah. They say you're on the spectrum because it's such a broad spectrum of behaviors and the way people think and the way people do. So that's a really hard one. When I get that question, the first thing I think about is my own child, and what he's going to do when he's an adult and when he's in the working world. Depending on the severity of the neurodiversity, in the town I live in, I see lots of people with jobs working at the grocery store, working in fast food, working for the county. So there's lots of different types of jobs, whether it's data entry, whether it's physical. It all depends on kind of where you land on the spectrum. I think there is jobs and I think there is employers that recognize that and are willing and acceptance of hiring those with the neurodiversities. But then the flip side to that is I personally don't know if my son will ever be able to be in the workforce in that way. And then when you talk about some of the things parents think about and the stresses, depending on where your child or your loved one is on the spectrum, you're not just worried about are they going to be a productive individual in society and be able to have a job. It's what happens as I age, what happens as I'm close to the dirt, who's going to be able to take care of somebody who can't technically take care of themselves, who's a grown adult. And that brings us into a whole nother podcast conversation, which is the amount of neurodiverse individuals that are living on the streets, that are displaced, that are in homeless shelters, or just having a really bad time because they can't fend for themselves, they can't take care of themselves, and their family's money didn't stretch long enough to support them after their loved ones who supported them before has passed away. So as far as the work world goes, for me, it's a tough one. I see it. There's tons of jobs. An old show that I've been catching some episodes of, this guy goes to the grocery store, same grocery store has this Down syndrome guy who works at the grocery store, and this guy has a relationship with this grocery store worker who has Down syndrome, and he's just the friendliest, most nicest employee. He has a job, he's effective, he does his thing, he has a smile all the time. And that just goes to show that, yeah, I mean, there's jobs out there. I think we're at a time in society where neurodiversities are more accepted and more prevalent and more identified, as well as sexuality and everything else like that. So I think society is making it easier for there to be a place for people in the workforce. It's just, how can we better support those in the workforce? And I think that's where we come in.
It's a great answer, considering I threw a curveball at you. And Olive, we'll take your response as well.
Well, I will. First of all, I'll give me as an example, if you don't mind. I had rubbish literacy when I was at school. I was told when I was 16 and doing my A-levels that it would be a good idea if Olive could learn to spell. And I've been in the same school since I was 4. I have no diagnosis because I'm too old. They hadn't invented it in my day. But I would have definitely been dyslexic if I had been a kid now. I then went on, but then I didn't get held back by it because it was just the way it was. And I was really good at maths, went and did a maths degree, managed to get a job as a software engineer, very successful software engineer, doing all sorts of interesting work in applications for medical automation, and then later on working on the internet. I'm afraid to say I was part of inventing the internet. And eventually I became the R&D director for a high-tech company. And before I changed life and then started being self-employed and started my career as resolving the challenges of dyslexia. So I was really successful, but I didn't have a label hanging around my head. And maybe that was the reason why. And weirdly enough, when I was a software engineer or a department manager, I've forgotten which, my director was really, really nice to me. He used to update my documents for me, just quietly. He'd say, give me that one and I'll have a go at it for you. And he would just do what Grammarly would do these days, basically. And so I think if you can find the thing that works for you, I mean, I was always somewhat bewildered when I look back on it, that I was probably dyslexic, but I could do coding. And so I could actually see, it didn't worry me at all. Recently I worked with a dyslexic creative writer, and that's a really interesting combination. And by the time I'd helped him improve his dyslexia, his creative writing got better because he could actually visualize his stories better. Because if you're a creative writer, you visualize the whole thing before you actually put pen to paper, as it were. So there's an awful lot of very talented people around. And if you look at people who do PhDs and they do so much research and bring so much information from all sorts of places, that quite often they've got sort of ADHD traits. And so doing some things like researching is probably another very, very frequently done topic. So I just think all you got to do, what you've got to do is find your niche and find out what really interests you. And that's why I would like to help all small children to find out what's really interesting in them. You know, you've got kids who play with dinosaurs who end up as doing something related to what on earth happened to the dinosaurs, as it were. And they've got extremely good talents, and I want them to keep those visual talents and those exceptional skills and not lose them along the way. Some people, and so many of them, go down the route of I'm a failure in school, and I can't do anything. And so that's the thing we've got to stop happening. And the other thing is, if we were talking about assessment earlier, I would be very happy if the assessments actually looked at what they were good at, rather than pointing out the things they can't do. As I say, just think of it like acne. All you're doing is pointing out what's wrong. What we want to do is point out what's right and then direct them in a direction that they can actually do something about it.
Yeah, give them the supports to improve the things that they might have challenges with. Well, makes perfect sense.
Give them the support to do the things they're really good at, so they can march along that path. And actually, some of the things they're struggling with might actually get washed out anyway, because they won't be. If they're happy doing what they're doing, they won't be so stressed anyway, which will be great.
Absolutely, it's all about reducing the stress. Olaf, Jay Sean, thank you both so much for your contribution today. We didn't get to cover half the notes I'd made, but that's okay. We still got an hour out of it. Myself and Jay Sean won't be here next week. We're hoping all of you might be available to jump on with Alyssa if you are free, because myself and Jay Sean are going off to do some business in Washington, D.C. So, yeah. So we'll be back in a couple of weeks, but hopefully Olive and Alyssa, and maybe we might get a lesser spotted Tana joining as well. But until then, please do look after yourselves and take care.
With some outro music.
FPK, Future Proof Knowledge Podcast, Mind Unlocked. With every episode we cast real talk, real tools, wisdom on the fly. Tune in, geek out, reach for the sky. FPK, Future Proof Knowledge